The Runaway King, Chapter 22. I was still seated against the pole when Eric came for me very early the next morning. Already awake, I see? Awake and still furious. I didn't even look at him. I heard you tried to sneak out last night. Everyone else is permitted to move about as they like. Why not me? Because you're not one of us yet. Well, then we're not going to the pirates. Why not? Now I looked at him. If you don't trust me, how will you convince them to? Eric's face reddened. Maybe I shouldn't trust you. He motioned with his arm, and a man with a long scar on his right cheek entered the tent. I closed my eyes a moment, certain that if I listened carefully enough, I'd hear the devils laughing at this new joke on me. He was the man who had held the torch the night I fought to rescue Nyla, and he clearly recognized me. I reluctantly stood to acknowledge him. His shoulder was visibly bandaged, which gave me some pleasure. So that's where I got him. Findon returned to us last night, Eric said. One of the men we played Queen's Cross with thought something was suspicious about you, so he asked Findon to come see. Findon said your horse looked familiar. Thinks you do too. Findon swaggered forward. Before I could stop him, he lifted up my shirt and showed the cut to Eric. Yep, this is the boy I told you about. That's where I stabbed him. Stabbed? I snorted at that. You couldn't control your sword to do worse than scratch me. Well, you forgot to tell me about attacking members of my family, Eric accused. I quietly put a hand on my knife. Well, you forgot to ask. Findon reared back and hit me in the jaw. I tumbled to the ground but grabbed his shirt on the way down and pulled him down with me. He landed on his wounded shoulder and grunted in pain. Then I withdrew my knife, putting it at Findon's throat. Maybe you should ask why they killed an innocent woman and nearly killed her young daughter. Eric's eyes widened. They did what? It's been too long since you participated in those Carthian raids. And then I leaned in closer to Findon. And if you participate in any again, I'll find you. Eric grabbed me by the shoulders and dragged me off the thief and then put a foot on his chest to keep him from coming after me. When Findon signaled that he had calmed down, Eric told him to sit up. He kept his seat, but his glare was fierce and his fists remained tightly balled. We have rules here, Eric said. We're thieves, not murderers. Well, isn't that what he did in the noble's house last night to that man? Findon pointed a stubby finger at me. If that man had escaped, he would have called others to capture us, Eric said. Sage saved all of us, twice, and he netted a fine profit besides. But what you did, that is inexcusable. It won't happen again. Findon's pouting tone suggested he couldn't care less if it happened again. Then he addressed me. You're one of us now? A pea-brained maggot like you? I said, no, never. Eric and I are leaving today. Findon's lip curled. I'll be waiting here when you get back. We have a score to settle. Well, get used to waiting. I'm not coming back. With that, I marched out of the tent. I kept to myself while we completed our preparations to leave. Although Eric made several attempts to ask about my part in the raid, I told him as little as possible and nothing about Nyla. It surprised me to find that he was nearly as bothered by the event as I had been. The pirates have a code about women and children, he said. They don't touch them, not if they're innocents. It should be the thieves' code, too. Well, maybe the code will protect me, I said. Do I still count as a child? Eric tilted his head. You don't count as an innocent. Fink brought us an extra serving of breakfast soon after. Not because I'm a servant, he pointed out when he handed the bowl, but just because we're friends, right? Did you spit in it? No. Well, then we're friends. When it was time to leave soon after, Fink made a last-minute appeal to come with us. He didn't bring out the tears, so I suspected he'd already played that card. You'll be in the way, Eric said. But I can help, Fink protested, but Eric shook his head. Eric doesn't have time to look after you, I said. He's going to have enough trouble just watching me the whole time, making sure I don't run off. Eric sighed, and then he noticed my grin. All right, you can come, he finally said to Fink, but you're too young to become a pirate, so you'll only be there as my boy, and you will keep an eye on Sage anytime I'm not around. Then he walked up to me and he untied his horse. Don't think you've tricked me into taking him, he muttered. I chose to bring him. He's actually useful to have around. I chuckled lightly and mounted Mystic. Here you go, Eric said, handing me a sword. You earned this. It was cheaply made and not weighted properly. Even if I were only a thief, I still wouldn't have accepted it. I gave it back to him. This isn't mine. But it's good enough for you, I snorted. Hardly. He tried again. Take the sword. I want the one I came here with. Why that one? The stones in the handle match my eyes, I said. Take this one or none at all. When it was clear I wouldn't accept the sword, Eric frowned at me, then kicked his horse forward, the rejected sword in his white-knuckled grip. I prodded Mystic ahead as well, only I turned him toward the tent, where they still kept my sword. Charging forward, I used my knife to slice through the tent fabric, flashed the blade at the startled thief inside, then grabbed my sword off the table. When I rode out again, Eric was waiting for me. You're incorrigible, he said. More than you know. I attached the sword and its scabbard around my waist and then said, Shall we go? Eric continued to look at me. I think I may grow to hate you before this is over. Yeah, but you don't already, and that's got to be some sort of record for me. To my surprise, Eric laughed. Within minutes, we had left the thieves' camp behind and were on our way to the pirates. Eric could barely contain his excitement. Tell me about the pirates, I said. What should I expect? Who knows what they'll think of you? You're young, but they'll accept boys your age if they think you're useful. Devlin got in 4 years ago after making a deal to kill the younger prince of Carthia. He later killed the priest who was suspected of hiding the boy. Not long after that, he became the pirates' king. He looked my way before adding, Think I already told you about the priest, and I can see it upsets you now. I knew him once, I said. Of course, that was only half the reason that my fists were clenched and my heart was pounding. Is that going to be a problem? Eric said, because if it is, no, that will not be a problem. I cocked my head. How did Devlin become king? Eric brushed his hand through the air. Any pirate could challenge the king in a sword fight. If he kills the king in the fight, then that pirate is immediately recognized as the new king. Has Devlin been challenged before? Sure, but he's never lost. He's a fierce warrior and requires strict obedience to the pirate code. I knew a little about the code, or at least what the code had been many years ago when the book from the castle library was written. Most of the code related to the mandatory punishments for various wrongdoings. It struck me as odd that a group who made their living off criminal activity would have such a strict discipline. But at the heart of the code was the order of loyalty. First, to the pirate king. Second, to their comrades. And third, to the home country of Avenia and its crown. If this was true, then it meant they would only follow King Vargan if it suited them. They could attack Carthia with or without Avenia's blessing. Eric had continued speaking while my mind wandered. I began listening again as he said, Besides, if the pirates are like my thieves, as long as you're fair, they're just as happy no matter who's in charge. What'll happen to the thieves now that you've left? Someone else will take over. I'm almost sorry you didn't accept my offer to stay, Sage. You seem to have the makings of a leader in you. Laughter burst from my mouth. Oh, I can provide a very long list of people who would disagree with you. I imagined what Gregor would think if he knew I was here and not cowering in my bed at the castle. That led me to wonder for the 100th time whether Amarinda really would keep from him the secret of who truly was there. But I had to push those worries away and concentrate on what lay ahead. So, what's the pirate camp like? They call it Tarblade Bay, or just Tarblade. And it's a rather clever place. There's no marked roads to it, obviously. So the only way you'd know it's there is to pass close by it. And if you do, you're bound to be captured. Once a person discovers the camp, they never leave. Obviously, I said. Obviously, Eric echoed. How many pirates live there? Hard to say. Could easily sleep 100, but there are always plenty out on the water. So I'm not real sure how many there would be if they were all there together. We'll likely see at least 50 there now, possibly more. I glanced at Eric. They say no one returns from the pirates, but you have. I was there as a friend, and I only left because they allowed me to. It's outsiders who don't return, and if they make us pirates, we will only leave by their permission. Well, that certainly complicated things, I said. Tell me more about Tarblade Bay. Eric nodded. It exists on 3 elevations, all of it visible from the sea. But by the time a ship is close enough to see it, the pirates have spotted them. By land, only the highest level is visible, and all it appears to be is a cleared field surrounded by tall, thick trees. That's where they meet as a group. Down a little hill are the kitchen and various tents. But again, a traveler could pass right beside it and not know any of it was there, unless they heard noises. Obviously. Eric was less amused this time. Do you want to know of this or not? I shrugged, and he continued. There's a steep path that leads from the living areas down to the beach below. It's a cliff wall along most of the beach otherwise. Backed against the cliff wall are places for everyone to sleep, except for the senior pirates up on top. Well, that's where we'll sleep then, I said, by the beach. You'll love it, Eric said. Each wave hitting the shore is another note in a lullaby. With that, we fell into silence, although I had to admit an excitement to sit beside the sea again. I was nervous about meeting the pirates. Everything I cared about hinged on my success, and at this point, failure seemed far more likely. It was several hours later when Eric halted our group and pointed ahead. From our position, there was very little evidence of anyone living here. Yet Eric proudly announced, "Welcome to Tarblade."